what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And the idea with that question is that if failure wasn't an option, then you would do whatever you wanted to do. But what I like to ask myself is, what would I do even if I knew I was going to fail? And that kind of creates a different dynamic around, well, what is so important to me that actually the outcome, or like the promises of it being financially successful or creating 1 million followers or readers of my book, like what would I do anyway? And I think that's another way to get to a place of real purity of intention around what you want to do, for others and not just for yourself.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. I am so excited today to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is failure. I know it's a little crazy, but I feel like social media just tends to showcase all the highs, all the highlights, all the wins. But behind every successful author or entrepreneur or yoga teacher is a story of battle wounds and failures that helped shape who they are today. And this just doesn't get talked about enough. And because it doesn't get talked about enough, I feel like people often are afraid to take risks, afraid to fail, afraid to launch their business, afraid to take yoga teacher training, afraid to start teaching, whatever it is. And so the more we can talk about failure and normalize it and show that it's part of the process of success, the better. So I'm so lucky that I have Dave Ursillo on the show with me today because he was really willing to open up and get raw and vulnerable about the topic of his failed first book launch. So we're going to talk about all the things that went wrong, the terrible things that went wrong. And together, Dave and I extract all the gold nuggets of wisdom and lessons and insight for you. So this episode is like a post-mortem of his failed book launch, but don't be fooled. Like, this post-mortem contains practical and spiritual wisdom that's relevant to everyone. Before we dive into the show, I just want to remind you that Elemental, my chakra challenge that I'm hosting with Savannah Spirit right now, is happening. Today is technically day 8, but you can start any time. This is an incredible free video series that Savannah and I have teamed up to offer all of you. And we deep dive into the first 4 chakras. So root chakra, water chakra, solar plexus, and heart chakra. We just laser focus on those 4 energy centers as a way to harmonize and balance your energy. If you're not already signed up and doing these classes, the time is now. I really don't want you to delay another day. These classes are 20 minutes a piece. They're totally feasible to fit into your morning or evening routine. You're going to love them. They're beautiful. I film them all outdoors to connect with the elements. So go to brettlarkin.com/elemental. The link will also be in the show notes if you're not already signed up. Now, today we're going to talk about all of Dave's failures, or his big first failure of his first book, but he's actually a highly, highly successful author and went on to publish 7 books spanning spiritual poetry, nonfiction, and memoir. He's published over 500 articles. He's been featured in 6 more books, including the International Chicken Soup for the Soul series. He is an incredible teacher of writing, creative self-expression, storytelling, and yoga. He's worked with over 4,000 students. He's been featured on Psychology Today, CBS News, Zen Habits, Creative Life. He's also a member of the Forbes Coaches Council. I really enjoyed getting to know him better as he really opens up in this episode, and you're going to walk away with so many insights. I know I did from this conversation. So let's dive right into it. So today we have a special episode. I'm already laughing. We're going to talk about failure. I have Dave with me again. He was on the show earlier, and I think social media celebrates success, right? And the positive moments. And it's so easy, whether you're a new yoga teacher or, just trying to make a change in your life, to look at whoever's doing what it is you want to do and assume that, well, it was so easy for them, right? Like, they had a book publisher and they had a website website that looked gorgeous and was up and running. And the reality is, even the people we admire and look up to struggled and failed. It's just that it never gets talked about. So today's episode is dedicated to talking about failure. And I'm going to share a bunch of mine, and Dave's going to share a bunch of his. But most importantly, we're going to share what were the learnings, right? What were the learnings? Because hopefully some of these are going to be pertinent and interesting to you, the person who's listening. So Dave, do you want to kick off by telling them about, I already know what you're going to talk about, your
There's so
first
many
book.
failures, Brett. Yeah, there's so many failures to choose from. Like, where do we even begin? Thank you again for having me on. It's so much fun to talk with you and with your community. So thank you to you, the listener. And when it comes to failure, my goodness, I have such a portfolio to choose from. But you're exactly right. These are things that often, these aren't like advertised, right? Like, we don't post about our failures all the time because, so much about the online world and social media world is about projecting success and like that you have your together, sorry for the language, and that you're not a hot mess. It's like, in essence is really natural. There's something really natural to wanting to share your successes and your accomplishments and to aspirationally cultivate your image, just because that's how our psychology works. The more you think about positive things and you surround yourself with people that you want to be like we, as social creatures, that's how we evolve over time. But in terms of failures, the biggest failure that I ever experienced was my first book that I self-published. It was called Lead Without Followers, and it was a many years in the making dream that I had. And I had this like upswell of amazing support around me writing this book. I had like bona fide authors and social media famous people encouraging me to write it. Like, they knew who I was, they knew what the book was, they knew the philosophy behind it. And push came to shove, I wrote it. I wrote 60,000 words in just under 3 months. And I self-published this book, and I was like, this is my destiny. Like, it's all going to change from here. I'm going to publish this book. It's going to be great. I'm going to go on a speaking tour, and yada, yada, yada. My career will be figured out for the rest of my life. And I published the book, and nothing happened. And it was like just a lot of quiet. And some people were like, oh yeah, this is good. And some people were like, this isn't a very good book. And my life didn't change. That was a really difficult and humbling experience.
And just to set the stage for people here, right? Like, you had quit or left your job as like as a speechwriter, right? Like, yeah, like as a really amazing speechwriter.
Exactly. So I was on this career trajectory in politics. I quit, and I had this whole different philosophy about like what leadership really is and what it really means, and why why politics today is getting everything so wrong. And I still really believe in that philosophy, but I wrote a book that I haven't read again since I wrote it. So I can't blame anyone for thinking it wasn't a very good book. But at the very least, I learned so much from that experience, Brett, which is, what we always say about failures. But specifically, what I got from that experience was, well, if I've done the book writing part wrong, now I know how to not repeat it in the future. And I've written 4 more books since then, and they've all done better and better.
Yes. So let's go a little bit deeper into the post-mortem. So
yeah,
why didn't this book end up working out the way you wanted it to? And I know I've heard you talk about before, like, you didn't cite very much feedback, right? You just kind of wrote this thing in a silo and then put it out there, and we're like, people are going to love it.
Yeah, totally. It was a lot. You're exactly right. The big thing that I learned from what I was doing wrong, not only with this book, but what I was really avoiding throughout my life, even though I was simultaneously trying to like be seen and become a thought leader and have a voice and teach people and create change in the world. But I was also so like terrified and uncomfortable being seen that I wouldn't even like comfortably go into a yoga room and be seen by fellow students. Right. So it's like it sounds like really hypocritical, but this is how things like shame or guilt or fear operate on a subconscious level. So,
and you weren't saying to people like, hey, read a sample chapter of my book, or like,
yeah,
what do you think of this?
Specifically, I didn't seek out beta readers or test readers of my book from my blog, which I've done every book since. So I get the most active readers from my blog, or you could say as a yoga teacher from your local community. And if they're like ravenous and supportive of your work and they show up to your classes, ask them for help. It can feel a little bit strange, especially if you're in this position of like quote unquote authority, but like humble yourself and ask them for your help, because this is the best way to get more perspective and feedback, to highlight your blind spots, and just to like treat the creative process as exactly that. There's a lot of learning, there's a lot of growth. It's not, nobody shows up and they just shine as an expert. Nobody shows up and they just have it all figured out. No one has it all figured out. Every book, album, Netflix show, it's never just one person creating a thing. It's always collaborative. And everything that has been produced in our world, not just content, but all of our evolutions and in science and mathematics, like everywhere, they're all collaborative. So to bring people in, beta readers would have been huge. To get more of an editorial team, I tried to hire a proofreader on the cheap, and that really came back to bite me because there was a ton of errors that this editor missed. Now I usually hire 2 or 3 editors to review one another's work and make sure that I expunge all those typos and things. So specifically, it was like that kind of stuff that really set me up and taught me some valuable lessons for the future. And I haven't repeated them since, knock on wood.
Yeah, I think sharing with everyone, getting feedback on everything early. And it's like you have to be more vulnerable early on.
You have to detach yourself from it, because hard. It's really hard, because no one teaches you how to do that unless you've gone through like an MFA where like they drill that into you in like sometimes a really unhealthy way, where they like forcefully, they like destroy your work so that emotionally detach from your connection to it. But oftentimes, because we as creators, as creatives, feel attached to our work, especially early on in our creative journeys, that it's really like, think about it, when I say creative journey, like the first yoga class you've ever teach that, you've been working on it for weeks, you've got every pose, every word scripted, and then like it's not what you thought it would be. It's really hard to work yourself out of that attachment to the outcome. But really what you have to do is reframe. This is where I think you were going, Brett. You have to reframe away from being attached to the outcome to being disciplined about your intention. If you're disciplined about the intention, then you can be malleable, you can be flexible, you can get feedback of someone saying like, I really didn't like this, and it doesn't wound you at your core. So that's a really powerful way to be a teacher, to be in a service role. I
really like what you're saying about being attached and committed to your intention, but not exactly the specific way that it has to manifest, right? So I'm going to try to give listeners a couple tips here, because I think you've already mentioned a lot, and I just want to, I love lists. So the first big tip, I think, based on your story, was don't hinge everything on one thing. And it's so funny because all of these like distill, it's like, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Like if you're like this one ebook or this one,
this will change everything. Yeah, everyone will know like, how great I am. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like if you're in that mindset of like, this one thing is going to be the thing, like that's just maybe a sign that you need, keep the enthusiasm, diversify, back off. And it's also, I think, a sign of being overly attached, right? To have that kind of mindset. So that's the first thing. The second is like what you're talking about, this idea that your creation, what you're creating isn't you. Don't take feedback personally, right? It's not a reflection on you once you put something out into the world and it, fails or doesn't fail. You kind of have to just have like an entrepreneur's mindset and try a lot of different things. And it's like some of the eggs will hatch and some of them won't. And I think that's where I really loved what you shared, which is like having a really clear intention. Like, so for example, having an intention of like, I want a thriving online business that helps, hundreds of people or thousands or millions, I don't know. That's an intention that is true. I think could be very true for someone and effective. That's very different than like my ebook sells like, 10,000 copies or something, right? Because my ebook about yoga or whatever, because that's really, really specific.
Yeah, and then you have to remain really loyal to your like the desire, like the intention being like, if you want to help people, stay loyal to that, but be unattached to the form, because that's the creative process that we're talking about. It's entrepreneurial, it's creative. It's like, that's the collaborative magic that makes something really, really unique for others. Because, Brett, as you know, like when you're creating anything and you're trying to help people, you can spend days, weeks, years, like trying to come up with the idea in your head of like what's going to help people. But what you really have to do is investigate it in a way of like Ask people, yeah,
Yeah.
figure it out when you're talking to them. So that is hugely helpful, and it's really vulnerable, and it really can like, I think it can kind of create some doubt, but that doubt is actually fuel for the creative process. It's not something that will derail you. Doubt is not the antithesis of creativity. Doubt is an ingredient in creating something that matters.
Right. And then some other things that we've touched on is this idea of a team, that you don't have to do everything alone. And I think that's really been pivotal in a lot of the success I've found personally, is that I really needed to let go of my control freak tendencies, because I'm a massive control freak, and say, you know what, if I'm going to have the impact I really want to have, and, you know, build the business I want to build, well, I can't do that alone. Right? It's really just completely not feasible. I'm going to need to have an amazing team of people who work with me and are excited about this vision. And I'm going to need to relinquish and release a lot of control. And talking to a lot of entrepreneurs and, you know, people who are trying to either grow or scale their business, this is something that people really struggle with. And I really, really, I still struggle with it. Where a lot of the time I'm like, nope, I need to let, you know, the team member whose job this is do it and not interfere and not jump in. And that idea of being supported, like you talked about the editors, right? In the example of your book, right? Like, it would be ridiculous to be like, I have to catch every single typo, or even maybe to be like, I'm the person who needs to be in charge of the cover design or marketing, if that's not your area of expertise. You need to bring in a team, or I think, you know, most successful people out there have a really incredible behind the scenes team that people maybe aren't aware of, supporting
One
them.
part exactly, Brett. Sorry to jump in there, but I'm getting excited as you're talking about this. It's exactly, and if you feel like you're in a position where you're like, how do I build a team? Like, that's a lot. There's a lot to that. Like, I've only just got to a place where I have a small team of freelancers working with me, like a research assistant. I have like a proofreader who goes through everything that I do. I have someone who I use for like editorial, like strategic editing of different projects. And then I have like a visual artist who helps me bring ideas to life. But I've been doing this for 10 years now. So really early on, if you feel like you're not there yet, like you don't want to overextend yourself or something, the short answer is you set up like an accountability group with like someone who's on a similar track as you, someone who's like also a yoga teacher, you know, like set up like a little like mini mastermind. It's like an accountability group, or just find a partner or find a mentor, like someone, and explain to them like, this is what I'm gathering us for. This is how I think it will benefit us. Like, let's do this. We can do it together, and keep accountable to one another in such a way that it helps you, again, like highlight your blind spots, create, like get more creative ideas, like run things through through the group for feedback. It's just something that kind of like expedites the learning process without you feeling like either too exposed to ask like a public audience, or maybe you don't have a blog or a yoga class yet to get that feedback from, and you don't want to like start to hire like 10 people, like, you know, all of a sudden. So start where you are, take those baby steps like Brett always encourages in a really helpful way. Get some, like, start the feedback loops.
Yeah, and this is where also, like, I want to say, jump in, like, an abundance mindset is so critical here. Because have you ever heard people say, like, well, I can't collaborate with someone else or do like accountability or mastermind with someone because like they'll steal my idea, right? And it's like, again, it's so human. Like, even I slip into that all the time where I'm like, oh, well, I don't know if I want, you know, such and such to do this, or I see someone else's thing and I'm like, oh, is this kind of too near what and that's a moment. Like I'm so fast at catching myself now. It's literally like a nanosecond. And I'm like, it's like the small self, you know, I'm like, okay, small, little selfish, you know, Brett
And the truth
version.
is, yeah, exactly, Brett. The
Take a
truth
deep
is that,
breath. That's not true. Right.
right, yeah, and here's the thing that you have to remember about ideas is that ideas are free, and ideas are actually worth nothing until you do something with them. So I don't care if it was you, Brett, or me that had the idea for Facebook 20 years ago. If we like didn't care about social media or didn't want to create like a global thing, like if we didn't even have that desire and there was billions of dollars waiting on the other side, it, like the Facebook that we know today wouldn't have be here today, right? So it's really only it's a matter of what you do with your idea. And it's, you know, every idea has essentially been done before. That's why every like startup or every $1 billion investment on Shark Tank is like X meets Y. Like it's about combining ideas and becoming and innovating and creating new, like something new entirely. So absolutely, the abundance mindset is really important, because otherwise you're never going to create anything. If you're stuck in a scarcity mindset, every time you write a blog post or teach a yoga class and say something interesting, if you're afraid that someone's going to steal it, like, let them steal it. It's okay. I swear that they're not going to run off and make $1 billion on your idea. I promise. So just like stay in your lane. Don't worry about, the vultures. Just keep doing what you're doing because you're in a place to serve, to help facilitate healing, and to, self activate. Like, those are the things that, nobody can steal that from you, especially if you stay committed to that intention.
Yeah, and every time you have energy that's going towards thinking you need to protect or change or, attack, like that's all energy that could be better used towards, as you said, staying in your lane. Because yeah, there's the ideas, so many people have same and similar ideas. It's really about the execution. It's about the hard work, the execution, and also the experience that's put in. And, I want to talk a little bit about timing just because you mentioned Facebook. And I was, it's so funny, right? Because like MySpace was basically same general idea as Facebook, basically identical. It was just a little early. And the way, they were more like they broke into the market through music, and then Facebook did it more through like college students a couple years later. And so again, sometimes it's just timing, right? Like if you have an idea or you have something that didn't work, or like maybe, like to put this in a really practical example, like you offered some incredible workshop, some yoga workshop, and then no one came. And then later you realize like, oh, it was Easter weekend. Like I hosted this on an Easter Sunday and I didn't realize that it was Easter Sunday, right? Like sometimes it's not personal, it's just timing. And part of that is things we can control. Part of it sometimes is things we can't control. That's the element of surprise, right? But I think a lot of people forget, like most people who are really, really successful, they had at least one big win where they got lucky with timing. I really firmly believe that. And unfortunately, that's not something we can control, but you can constantly always be putting new stuff. Like the more you put new stuff out there, the more you're constantly innovating and experimenting, like the more likely, like you're putting more balls in the air so that like that good divine timing will hopefully touch one of them. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely, Brett. What I hear you saying, I think it's really kind of like a reminder to like remember that this is going to take like a darker turn, or maybe just like a human turn, but remember that like time is limited. Remember that we're mortal too, because timing is everything. But I think like it's a reminder to act on it. Like if you want to, not only because like time is limited and because we're mortal creatures, but like if you want something, if you want to give yourself a chance to make an idea work, whether it's building out a yoga class to like your first, like, so that 30 students are there every week, or creating a book, you have to at some point like choose when the time isn't right, and eventually the timing will be right. Does that make sense? Like it's the timing is never going to be perfect. Like you never know that the timing is perfect until you've already acted on it.
Yeah.
And the chances are really good that you acted on it thinking like, well, the timing's not right. Like it's like 50% right or 70% right. But until you do it, you only learn in hindsight when the timing was right. So it's just encouragement to remember that we don't have all the time in the world, and that eventually you have to choose when the time is wrong, but you'll get there. You'll get there when you give yourself enough chances.
Right. And keep putting yourself out there. I think that's like the biggest message, right? I think actors and actresses, like they really have that down, right? Like they're always going to the castings, they're always going to the auditions, right? And it's just part of it's not like will I today. It's like they wake up and show up. And it's just like part of their ethic, their work ethic.
Exactly. Something that I always say, Brett, is that showing up is so important. It doesn't promise you anything. Just by showing up, it doesn't mean that the world will open up and that, pocketbooks and wallets will open up and you'll make $1 million, but it doesn't promise you anything. But showing up is the least you can do. It's the absolute foundation that you need to continually do in order for anything else to happen after. So at the very least, you have to show up.
Yeah. And it's always so interesting, I think, too, like just staying with the actor or actress analogy that, they have some role and it's like a breakthrough role and they're so famous and everyone's like, oh my gosh, you're so amazing. But the reality is like they were probably an amazing actor in like 6 off-Broadway plays before that where they were like just as good. It's just like no one's noticing till now, and that I think is really, really common. And that's why, getting in touch with why what you're trying to manifest or what you're trying to do is important to you personally, regardless of the outer external, right? Like acclaim, getting connected to that deep why is what makes I think all the failures, like, not worthwhile, but it's like you do it anyway because it's a passion, right? It's something you love.
There's exactly, Brett. What I hear you saying, there's a saying of what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And the idea with that question is that if failure wasn't an option, then you would do whatever you wanted to do. But what I like to ask myself is what would I do even if I knew I was going to fail? And that kind of creates a different dynamic around, well, what is so important to me that actually the outcome or like the promises of it being financially successful or creating 1 million followers or readers of my book, like what would I do anyway? And I think that's another way to get to a place of real purity of intention around what you want to do, for others and not just for yourself. And there's something really special there when you can intersect your own personal journey and your desires for yourself with service and giving to others. That's the real sweet spot, I think.
I couldn't agree more. So Dave, tell folks where they can find and stay in touch with you after the show. Of course, I'll put all the links below, but just give them a reminder and, where they can find your books as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brett. It's such a fun conversation. You can find me on Instagram at Dave Ursillo. The last name is Ursillo. It means little bear, loosely translated in Italian. Take that and make of it what you will. You can also find me at daveursillo.com. That's where all my books are, where my writing is. You can subscribe to my newsletter. I send out private correspondence and different unpublished stories and lessons from the life that I'm living and trying to teach people how to face what they're avoiding and also live with purpose in their lives. And you can always reach out to me directly by emailing me, dave@daveursillo.com. I love to hear from people who've listened to podcasts and interviews. So drop me a line. Let me know what resonated with you. Or if you have a question, want some clarity around something that we discussed, I'd be happy to connect with you in that way as well.
Savannah family, I would love to hear if this theme of failure and kind of opening up about what early success, aka failure, looks like. Is it resonating with you? Make sure to let me know. You can find me on Instagram at Larkin Yoga TV, and be sure to also tag and find at Savannah Spirit on Instagram as well. Follow both of us, and I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback on the show. You can DM me on Instagram, and make sure to hang out on the yoga mat with me and Savannah Spirit in this chakra challenge that we're hosting together right now. Remember, you can get it and sign up at brettlarkin.com/elemental. And I just want to thank you so much for being here and listening all the way to the very, very end. I'm sending you so much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.